We need 5,000 likes on this video.
It was a YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and my podcast channel as well on Spotify Radio. Guys, how you doing this evening? It's your man, Mr. Charles, back with another episode of Charles Real Talk Podcast. So we keep it real, we keep it raw, we keep it authentic. Real talk, real subjects. Tonight, y'all, we're going to get into something that's very educational. I know a lot of black people, and I'm going to say that a lot of us not going to listen to this because it is educational, and we're not interested in what it's about. But I'm going to tell you anyway. It's about the myth of economic inequality by Thomas Sowell. Once again, the title of this video is The Myth of Economic Inequality by Thomas Sowell. So we're going to jump into this thing, and we're going to share this information with everyone to let you know what this is about. So Thomas Sowell wrote a book a few years back, on the myth of economic inequality. So it's going to be dealing with a lot about us. So we need to listen to this and open our minds to what he is saying, because what he is saying, from my research and understanding, happens to be absolutely positively 100% true. Now, this is going to be a two-part series, so we're only going to do half the video tonight because I don't want you guys to get bored and uninterested. So we're going to do two parts of this video, one tonight and then another one tomorrow. We'll continue with the video, the end this video from Thomas Sowell, The Myth of Economic Inequality. So with all that being said, man, we're going to jump right into this video, man. Check it out. I hope you guys like it. Once again, man, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Punch that like button if you like the content that we have on this channel. And let's get it going, man.
All the time, and it happened just this week. A young person I'd never met introduced himself to me and said that when he saw our guest today on an earlier episode of this program, he felt he was seeing a man who knew how to think. Dr. Thomas Sowell on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Thomas Sowell has studied and taught economics, intellectual history, and social policy at institutions that include Cornell, Brandeis, UCLA, and Amherst. Now a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Dr. Sowell has published more than a dozen books, including the classic A Conflict of Visions. Coming soon, a revised edition of his most recent volume, Discrimination and Disparities. Tom Sowell, welcome.
Thank you.
You grew up in Harlem, dropped out of high school to join the Marine Corps during the Korean War, received an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a master's from Columbia, and your doctorate from the University of Chicago. All of which pales by comparison with the fact that you once tried out for the Brooklyn Dodgers. But during this period, from Harlem to the University of Chicago, throughout your 20s, you've said, you spent most of the decade of your 20s as a Marxist.
Yes.
Why? What was the attraction?
Well, I guess I first was very puzzled. See, there's one little correction I would make. At age 16, I was a dropout, high school dropout, and I went to work full time as a Western Union messenger.
Delivering telegrams.
Delivering telegrams.
We better say that because there will be a generation that won't know what Western Union was. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's true too.
Right.
And so I worked in the area of Manhattan called the Chelsea District, which is around 23rd Street, 9th Avenue. And at the end of the day, I had several ways of getting back home. The easiest and fastest way was with a subway, which was a nickel in those days. When I was feeling flush, I might go for a bus for a dime. And then when I was really getting reckless, I would take the Fifth Avenue bus, which was the elite of the buses, was 15 cents. And so I would walk over to Fifth Avenue, take that bus. And it would take me up through all the glamorous parts of Fifth Avenue, past the Empire State Building, past the great stores and things of that sort. And then on 57th Street, it would turn, and this is just the elite part of town.
Sure, right there where the park starts.
Yes, and then the park starts at 59th.
Oh, sorry.
57th, I would turn over, again, the same kind of scene, past Carnegie Hall.
Right.
Columbus Circle, there was no Trump Tower at that time, and on up to about 72nd Street, and go out to Fifth Avenue, out to Riverside Drive, which is another elite area. So for miles after that, you'd have all these wonderful luxury apartment buildings and so on. And finally, around 129th or 30th Street, it would go on a long viaduct, and then it would do a right turn back into the occupied area, and there you'd see the tenements. And I would wonder, why is this? I mean, why this huge disparity? And there was nobody else. There was no other explanation around. There was nothing. There was nothing there other than Marxism. And I stumbled across. I had not read Marx, but I bought a secondhand set of encyclopedias, small set, for some ridiculously low price. And I looked up Karl Marx. I'd heard the name, and the stuff that he said seemed to make sense. And then later on, I would get more and more into it. The argument was that the rich had gotten rich by taking from the poor.
Right.
And well, that was one explanation. But what is interesting, there was no other explanation out there really, and that's true largely in our colleges, universities today.
But so by the time you went to Harvard undergrad, you drop out at the age of 16, and you start reading Marx in your late teens.
I start reading Marx, yes, 1949, at age 19.
Age 19. And then you're in the Marine Corps for a couple of years. What was it, 2-3 years? 2
years. It was actually one year, 11 months, and 5 days, but who's counting?
All right, so by the time you went to Harvard, you had already become intellectually engaged with Marxism.
Yes.
And Harvard didn't talk you out of it, and the study of economics at Harvard didn't talk you out of it, nor did getting a master's at Columbia, nor did getting a doctorate at Chicago dissuade you from Marxism. Is that? And you studied with Milton Friedman of all people. How could you have sat in Milton Friedman's classroom and remained a Marxist?
Some people are just stubborn. But what really changed me was not the University of Chicago. It was my first job working in a professional capacity for the government. I was a summer intern.
This is after Chicago?
No, while I was still a graduate student.
Got it.
And so during the summer vacation, I worked in the U.S. Department of Labor, and I began to realize, from a number of things, that the government is not simply the personification of the general will, like Rousseau or others. The government is an the government institutions have their own institutional interests. One involved the minimum wage law. I was a big supporter of that. But I also knew that there was an argument that minimum wage law simply priced low-wage workers out of a job. And my first assignment was dealt with minimum wages in Puerto Rico. And as I looked at the numbers, I would see as they would jack up the minimum wages, the number of jobs would go down and so forth. But there were two explanations. One was that of the economists, that you priced the people out of a job, and the other was that there were hurricanes that had come through Puerto Rico. You see, during the sugar harvesting, and therefore, and I was studying the sugar industry, and therefore it destroyed a lot of the crop. Therefore, you wouldn't hire as many workers. Now in Chicago, I'd been taught that if there are two different theories, there should be some empirical evidence in principle that could distinguish what would happen under one theory from what would happen under the other.
Right.
And so I wrestled with that for most of the summer. And one morning I came in and I said, I got it. What we need are data on the amount of sugar cane standing in the fields before the hurricane struck. And as I waited for the congratulations, I could see stricken looks around me in the room. Like, this guy has stumbled on something that will ruin us all. You know? And they said, well, we don't have those data. I said, oh, I'll bet the Department of Agriculture has it. He said, well, but that doesn't mean we have it. You'd have to have a request go up the chain of command to the Secretary of Labor. He would then confer with the Secretary of Agriculture. It would come down the chain of command in the Department of Agriculture to whoever has those numbers, and so on. I said, good. Well, they say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, so I will now submit my request to the Secretary of Labor, which I did. And I am still patiently awaiting this reply.
And the institutional fear of the number was what? That it would...
The U.S. Department of Labor administers the minimum wage law.
I see.
And the money and the careers of perhaps a third or some other significant percentage of the Labor Department's resources come from administering the minimum wage law. One of the real farces of all this is that the law itself, Section 4D, I still remember, requires the Labor Department to study the employment effects of minimum wages. And those studies are absolutely a farce. In fact, some years after I left, I did an article saying why those studies were a farce. And when I came back later on to the Labor Department to do some research, one of the older librarians who remembered me turned to the younger librarian and she said, "This is the man who wrote that article that has everybody up in arms."
So you began to be dissuaded of Marxism
and of government in general, because the government is not out there at the personification of the national interest.
Right.
They have their own interests, and the Labor Department was clearly an interest in keeping the minimum wage, because that's their jobs and careers.
All right.
And power.
Which brings us, if I may, to one of my favorite books, your 2000 book. This is a beat-up old copy. Mm-hmm. This book, Conflict of Visions. Yes. Which you published in 2007, and you lay out. I'm sorry.
1987.
I beg your pardon. 1987.
Reprinted in 2007.
Well, beat up as this book is, it turns out this is a reprint. Sorry, 1987, and you lay out two competing ways of looking at economics and politics. Really, two competing ways of looking at life that go back at least 200 years: the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. The constrained vision, I'm quoting from A Conflict of Visions, sees the evils of the world as deriving from the limited and unhappy choices available, given the inherent moral and intellectual limitations of human beings, close quote. So the constrained vision understands itself as constrained by the limitations of reality itself.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, they cannot proceed as so many do, that good things happen automatically, but bad things are somebody's fault.
Got it. And then to continue here, the constrained vision, again, quoting from A Conflict of Visions, for the amelioration, improvement of the human condition, the constrained vision relies on certain social processes, such as moral traditions, the marketplace, or families, not government. So explain that. Why do we rely on processes rather than the will of the people instituting changes to improve our condition?
Well, it doesn't ignore government. Even for the market to work, you have to have a government. As Europe discovered when the Roman Empire collapsed, and the economies collapsed also. But I guess one of the reasons would be that with the government, you have surrogate decision makers, and they cannot possibly know as much as the individuals whose personal decisions have been preempted. I see.
All right, which brings us to the unconstrained vision. When, again, I'm quoting you, when Rousseau said that man is born free but everywhere in chains, he expressed the essence of the unconstrained vision, in which the fundamental problem is not nature or man, but institutions.
Yes.
Would you explain that one?
Well, he has the notion that, that good things happen naturally. And if they're bad things, it's because institutions, including civilization itself, have made these bad things happen. And of course, and I think that's really the implicit assumption behind a lot of things that are said on the left today. And why in my most recent book I go to a lot of trouble to show that in nature, there's nothing resembling equal opportunity. That wherever you look around the country, around the world, you find people who live up in the mountains, poor and backwards, even in the richest countries, including the United States. I believe the poorest country in the United States, county rather, was in a mountain community, which was almost 100% white.
Somewhere in Appalachia, West Virginia, Southern Ohio. Right.
Yes. And the men in that county had a life expectancy 10 years less than men in a county in Virginia.
And the unconstrained vision says, let's fix that. Surely we can pass a law that would improve that. And the constrained vision says, well, now wait a moment. If people who live in isolated pockets in mountains are poor and backwards all around the world, and we see this pattern over and over and over again, maybe there's something very deeply rooted in reality about that that's hard for us to get at. Correct?
Yes.
All right. So in the book, A Conflict of Visions, you're very dispassionate and very analytical, and you lay out the unconstrained vision, and you lay out the constrained vision, and you don't really come out blazing in favor of one or the other.
No, that is not a book meant to show that one vision is better than the other. It's there to show you what they are and what you're assuming if you go one direction or another.
Okay.
It's to encourage people to understand the implicit assumptions behind all this, without which you're just at loose ends.
All right. So pondering all this, I noticed something, a column that you wrote, this is a couple of years ago, in which you rebutted Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. And Kristof had ascribed the gaps between African Americans and whites in America, gaps in wealth, gaps in educational achievement, the usual gaps, to, and this is a quotation from Kristof, to the lingering effects of slavery, close quote.
Oh, yes.
And here's Tom Sowell, quote, "If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. In other words, we could compare hard evidence on the legacy of slavery with hard evidence on the legacy of liberals." Close quote. And so there it is. Life is hard. You use the word hard. You use the word serious. You use evidence. Tom Sowell is a man of the constrained vision through and through and through. Correct?
Yes.
No.
Yes, part of a vanishing breed, I might add.
So when you were a Marxist, the notion, explain that, because the Marxism.
Well, but no, you see,
so that's complicated.
Even when I was a Marxist, I had the same intellectual standards.
Right.
And that's what eventually led me away from it.
Oh, I see.
In other words, I hadn't done all the research. I hadn't gone around the world
looking for evidence.
Yes.
Okay. So
socialism is a great idea. That does not mean it's a great reality. One of the things that disturbs me tremendously is about this enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders and socialism at a time when people are literally starving in Venezuela, an oil-rich country. And they're breaking into grocery stores to try to get food, and they're fleeing to neighboring countries, most of which are not all that prosperous themselves, but at least you don't starve to death in them. And none of that makes a bit of difference. Mm-hmm. I don't think most of these people who are out there cheering for Bernie Sanders have given a thought to Venezuela.
To the evidence.
That's right.
To the evidence.
Yeah.
All right. Which brings us to something that you refer to in a number of columns as the retrogression, the experience of African Americans in this country. Economic progress, I'm quoting you. "Despite the grand myth that black economic progress began or accelerated with the passage of the civil rights laws and the war on poverty programs of the 1960s, the fact is that the poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. But over the next 20 years, the poverty rate among blacks fell another 18 percentage points. This was just the continuation of a previous economic trend, but at a slower rate of progress. It was not some grand deliverance." Close quote. That is so counter to what we are taught in school, what appears on the editorial pages of newspapers, that I feel as though I want to ask you, you really want to stick with that assertion?
I have more evidence in my most recent book, Discrimination and Disparities. I point out that this really is a pattern not peculiar to blacks or even to the United States, that you can see the same thing in England, you can see it in any number of other countries, that the poor were much worse off economically, let's say in the first half of the 20th century, and yet in terms of their own behavior, they were far more decent societies, and afterwards, after this welfare state that's supposed to make them better off and better human beings, that's when the crime rate skyrocketed on both sides of the Atlantic. The British were famous for being perhaps the most polite, considerate society in the world. Prior to that, after that, you get things like the 2011 riots over there, went through London, Manchester, where they're going through this. They anticipated Ferguson and Baltimore by a few years. And the same thing is the burning down of buildings, the throwing of gasoline bombs, the whole smear. And none of those people were descendants of slaves.
So the poor people were doing, if the lesson of the 20th century is something like poor people, including in this country African Americans, were improving their lot and leading fundamentally decent lives until the government decided to help them.
Yeah, yes.
That's a fair statement.
Well, they're better off economically because of what's been given.
Right.
But of course, when you have the crime rate, I mean, I got the first inkling of this some years back when I was at some school in Harlem doing some research. And I looked out the window and I mentioned in passing that when I was a little kid, I used to walk my dog in that park. And looks of horror came over the students' faces. Nobody in his right mind would have a child go into that park, walking a dog or not. The principal was warning these students not to cross this park, which is about a block and a half wide, even in groups of 6. And when I tell them about how in this hot summer nights I would sleep out on the fire escapes in Harlem, they looked at me like I was a man from Mars. People were doing that all over New York. They were doing it in Philadelphia, Washington, wherever I've known people. That was a common thing for poor people. We didn't have the money for air conditioning.
Right.
You slept out on the fire escape or in the parks. Where Walter grew up
Walter Williams.
Walter Williams grew up in a housing project in Philadelphia. He was saying on the hot summer nights, the people would be in this project would have little balconies. They'd sleep out on the balconies, and the ones on the first floor who didn't have balconies would sleep out in the yard. And that there were old men who you could see sit on a hot summer night, sitting outdoors into the wee hours playing cards or checkers or whatever. It was a different world.
It was a safe world.
And it was infinitely safer.
Now, what about family structure, Tom? Again, I'm quoting you. Most black children were being raised in 2-parent families in 1960. 30 years after the liberal welfare state, the great majority of black children were being raised by single parents.
Yes.
How does that? By the way, we should note that Patrick Moynihan publishes the Moynihan Report in 1965.
Yes.
And he's alarmed because the illegitimacy rate among black families is 25% then. Now, among whites, it's over a third.
Yes.
Hispanics, it's over half. And among African Americans, it's over 70%. What's going on there?
Well, this is, again, this too, you find the same thing in Britain. You find it in France, in Norway. You find it in the Western world. In fact,
The dissolution of the family structure.
Oh, yeah, there are any number of Western nations where 40% of the children are raised with only one parent.
Right.
At the extremes, compared to Asian countries, at the extremes, Iceland, it's 2 out of 3 children born are raised in a single-parent home. In South Korea, it's 1 out of 66.
Wow. And so, that's the welfare state?
Yes,
it is.
Oh, you're paying. You're creating a situation where if first of all, you're creating a situation where if the man stays there, the government will not give the woman welfare, and if he leaves, it will. And so they're paying. When you pay people not to get married, more people don't get married.
Right. Okay. So what would have happened if Lyndon Johnson, instead of becoming a liberal, had remained a crusty, tough, skeptical Texas conservative,
Yes.
which is certainly the way he started his career. If Lyndon Johnson had embraced the constrained vision instead of instituting the war on poverty and the Great Society and so forth, what would the country look like today?
A lot better. You would not have the same rates for crime and so on. Because, you see, you can't have a welfare state in a democratic country unless you first have a welfare state vision. And when you buy all the assumptions of that vision, then you're buying a lot of trouble. One of the episodes I think epitomized it was in France in this case. That there were knife attacks by various people from North Africa against Chinese people in some suburb of Paris. And one of the things that the attackers said, that why are you attacking the Chinese? And it wasn't because of anything the Chinese had done to them. He said, they have nice clothes and big cars. That's not fair. I mean, that's, egalitarianism as a philosophy is one thing, but the actual consequences of it mean things like resenting other people's good fortune.
Right. All right. So one response to the gap, again, I return to this gap between African Americans and other Americans, affirmative action.
Yes.
Which brings us back to your alma mater, Harvard. According to
I'll never live it down.
You'll never live it down, yes. You once told me that the principal benefit of a Harvard degree was never again having to be impressed by anybody who had a Harvard degree. Is that right?
Absolutely.
All right. So these are figures that were published in the Harvard Crimson, the student newspaper. In the Harvard class of 2019, these are the kids who will be graduating next June, the average SAT score for black students was 2149. By the way, these are all good scores, but for black students, 2149, white students, 2218, Asian students, 2300. Well, now that must be reasonable because it's taking place at Harvard, the seat of reason.
Well, that wasn't quite how I described it when I was there.
Affirmative action. Is that we ought not to be doing this?
There are various laws and policies that benefit one group at the expense of another. But I think affirmative action has the distinction of being one that it harms everybody, though in different ways. And so there's a lot of evidence that there are black kids who have all the qualifications to be successes in college, who nevertheless are failures because they are systematically mismatched with institutions whose standards they don't meet, even though they may meet the standards of 80 or 90% of the colleges in America. I remember first aware of this when I was teaching at Cornell, and I found that half the black students at Cornell were on some kind of academic probation. And so I went over to the administration building and looked up the SATs of these students. The average black student at Cornell at that time scored at the 75th percentile.
Which is pretty darn good.
Yes. And so that means that in most colleges in this country, they would have no trouble, and many of them would be on the dean's list. But at Cornell, the average liberal arts student at that time was in the 99th percentile. And when you're teaching the students like that, you teach at a pace that most people of any race cannot keep up with. And it was always complained that I was assigning all kinds of reading. But heck, I'm teaching kids who are in the top 1%. They can keep up with the reading that I'm assigning.
So Cornell was taking very talented black kids and spending 4 years teaching them to feel inadequate.
Yes.
All right, y'all. That's the first half of this interview with Dr. Thomas Sowell on the myth of economic inequality. Guys, listen, I don't know if you guys really take economic inequality serious, and I'm not a professor on it, don't proclaim to be. But for those of you who are listening on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and my radio podcast, I want you guys to know that this is a serious issue. Like, this issue ain't just started. like this interview was done 6, 7, 8 years ago. But at the end of the day, it's facts of what transpiring in the lower percentile of society, mainly in the blacks of this country, and as he said, all over the world, the poor are being segregated against. It goes deeper, man. He gets really deep into this subject matter, and I think you should listen to it and listen to it closely to what he's saying, because he's educating you on what has been going on for decades. This ain't that started. See, if LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, did not come out with the welfare reform program, we wouldn't be in this situation, is pretty much what he's saying. Because we'll still be having jobs, we'll still be working. People was working then. You had working class people then, mothers, fathers. You had 2 family homes then. Man, listen, you got to listen to this information that he's giving you, because he's schooling you on something that's really, really serious, and something that you can educate yourself with now, as well as educate your children with, because this pandemic, per se, continues on now in the generations that have come behind us. And it is going to continue if we don't break this cycle and have our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and nephews to educate themselves and don't be a part of this low poverty, below low poverty line. We need them to step up and take on the challenge of this country and the educational system and the job system, because they can do it. They have better opportunities than what a lot of us had, a lot of our grandparents had, a lot of our parents had in the past. So I hope you guys will go back, listen to this once again. Again, this is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 tomorrow. So we're going to continue with this. Man, listen, I need you guys to share this. I need you guys to share this, because this is something that we have never heard or we never took heed to, and it's time that we start waking up and smelling the coffee, especially those of us who's up in age now, who's in our 40s, our 50s, our 60s. We need to listen to this, because this is so deep that we never paid attention to it. And it was right before our face. It was right under our nose, as the old people say, and we didn't see it. Welfare has crippled the African American in this country. Like it, love it, whatever you want to say, it has. Because without the welfare, before Lyndon B. Johnson implemented it, people was working. They was going to work. You know what I'm saying? So listen to this brother, man. Listen to this man. This man has been doing this for a long time. He has evidence that will back up what he's saying. So I hope you guys listen to this, man. I'm not going to hold you because I don't want to bore you, because I want you to jump into part 2 tomorrow. Don't miss it. We're going to jump into part 2 of Thomas Sowell on the myth of economic inequality. We're going to get into it, man. We're going to jump into this thing. We're going to ride this thing into the bitter end and get the full effect of what he's telling us. So, guys, I want to thank all of my followers from both of my YouTube channels, as well as my Facebook channels, pages, and my Instagram pages as well. Guys, listen, I want you to share this here. I want you to invite people to the next showing of this video, part 2. If you can get in to watch part 1 now, go ahead and get in to watch part 1. But I want you to get them to prepare for part 2 tomorrow. I know it's Friday. People get ready to go out, have fun. Even if you just record it or download it later, I want you to listen to it, people. I want us to pay attention to this. So I want to thank everybody for stopping by, taking a look at this thing, man. I appreciate it, man. You guys know I love you. I thank you for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to this channel or the other channel, go ahead and subscribe to the channels right now. This is Real Talk Podcast. You see it up top. You can go ahead and hit the subscribe button, subscribe. Drop the like, punch that like button down below, man. Let me know you like the contents that I'm bringing to you. Man, we're going to build this thing, man, on our way to 50,000 subscribers with the help of you being the first one. So we're going to get there, guys, with your help. Drop your comments down below on this subject or any subject that you want to talk about, man. I'm here for you guys. This is your platform. You know, I bring the noise to you. However you want to hear. Don't forget, no matter what comments you put down there, I'm going to respond to them. Also, turn your notification bell so you don't miss part 2 of this thing. For my radio listeners, I will be back tomorrow with part 2 of this thing, man. Please share this audio to any of your friends and family that may be interested in listening to it. I am on Spotify Radio, guys. You can definitely check me out there. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Once again, I'm your man, Charles, with Real Talk Podcast, or we keep it real, we keep it 100, we keep it thorough and all the way, man. And it's real topics, real people, man, and we definitely want to continue to build up on this momentum that we're going on right now. Thank you guys for joining in, man. Thank you guys for stopping by. I hope to see you guys tomorrow, man. I hope you guys will tune in tomorrow on part 2 of Thomas Sowell on the myth of economic inequality, because it is fire and it's deep and it's educational. Until then, man, before I drop my mic, as I say on both channels, man, I bid you peace.